Hello, viewers. Tonight we are going to be talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. We'll be talking with Professor Eric Goldman and an expert who's talked a lot about this subject. Hopefully, I will not be boring him with some of my questions, but we are going live now. Maybe. Da-da-da, there we are. And live. All right. They can see you. It's a miracle. There is, I had to reset everything up for my last show, and so it is all kinds of weird on the screen right now. There we are. Now everyone can see us. Yes, I want to remove that, because he is not that guest. There we are. All right, how's it going, Professor?
I'm great, thanks. Yourself?
Doing good. You're very glad to finally actually talk about this subject on the show, because I think it's a really important one for the internet. In fact, one of the most important ones. For anyone out there who doesn't know about Section 230, you haven't been paying attention to the news for one, because both the Republicans and the Democrats seem to be attacking it. It is a piece of legislation that allows for user-generated content to exist on the internet. Without it, providers, be them Facebook or your small blog with comments, would possibly be liable for things that users post on it. It allows for you to moderate content and thus get protection from this act for anything that might have been posted, as long as I understand the law, you are actually moderating. It's under attack from a lot of people who say it's being used for censorship and all kinds of other things on platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And I want to have a discussion about this and kind of get you all to really understand what the law means, what its importance is right now, and just the general nature of the fight that's going on. So I reached out to Professor Goldman here and asked if we could have a conversation about it. That sums it up pretty well, I think, right?
Yeah, and I'm excited to have it. I can't talk enough about Section 230. It's that important.
It is. So, I gave a very, very brief understanding of it, but a very dumbed down version of it. I'm sure you have a slightly better description of what it is. Could you tell the audience what you think, Section 230 actually is?
Actually, you did a pretty good job. But I'm going to actually take it one step further and say Section 230 is the legal proposition that websites aren't liable for third-party content. It's a really elegant way of thinking about the problems. It doesn't say no one's liable for content. It says that the person who originates content and posts it online is responsible for it, but the other people who facilitate the hosting or dissemination of that content are not. And it's that legal principle that allows the hosts and disseminators of content to feel comfortable working with people that they may not be able to understand, may not be able to vet, may not be able to verify, and still feel like they can give them a voice. We rely on Section 230 every day, many times a day. In fact, we're relying on it right now. All of us are. This conversation is being recorded through Zoom, which relies on Section 230, and being published through Twitch, which relies on Section 230. We couldn't have the conversation we're having today without this very simple proposition. Websites aren't liable for third-party content.
Very simple. Yeah, absolutely. The chat box would not be here if we were not doing this, and I probably wouldn't be taking anyone live. I would instead be editing afterward if we were trying to even come close to this.
Yeah, but it's not just the chat box. It's the fact that you're getting the privilege of
I'm sending it up to Twitch, and so they are covered. Yes.
So Twitch is allowing you to have access to their tools, and you're allowing your commenters and viewers to have access to the chat box. And Zoom is letting all of us have this conversation because you and I are connecting that way as well. So it's Section 230 all the way down, like it curls all the way down.
Yes. So the attacks on it right now are coming very politically motivated. They aren't about the technicalities of it. They aren't about, even for the most part, the legalities of what's going on. They're really political in nature from what I see. You as dean of a law school have probably a pretty strong opinion on the legal side of this, but I'm sure you have a political opinion on what's going on too. For me, I've seen the last 4 years of Republicans attacking Section 230, trying to come up with ways to defeat it, basically, and the Democrats somewhat stopping them. And then now we see the Democrats going at Section 230, saying they're protecting it, but if you read the changes they want to make, it's not any better than what the Republicans were trying to do. So, am I reading that right?
I mean, again, a great summary of it. Really, I think we have to understand the difference between Section 230's legal and doctrinal merits and Section 230's use as a political tool. And right now, so much of the action that's taking place about Section 230 is, in fact, what you described, pure politics. It's not about making the internet better. It's not about benefiting communities. In fact, the people who are advocating the changes really don't even understand what it would do. They don't understand the mechanics or hydraulics of Section 230 well enough to be able to see what consequences might flow from whatever they're proposing. But they don't really care. And so this is where the breakdown in our political process has taken place. For most of the people who are advocating for Section 230 reform, it is simply about scoring points with some community that wants to burn it down. And what we're really seeing is Section 230 is a proxy for how people are feeling about the internet. And that proxy is people are willing to burn down the things that I love the most, perhaps you love the most. I'm guessing many of the audience members love the most. They don't care about that. That's not consequential to them. They'd rather score these political points elsewhere. So we are in the fight of the internet's life right now because of the fact that we're not having a discussion about the merits of Section 230. We're not having a discussion about what Section 230 actually does. We're having a discussion about would we score points with a community by changing Section 230, and that creates a really dangerous recipe for reform.
Yeah. So again, that's our political environment as it stands today, though. I mean, that's just there aren't many topics that aren't running that way. We just happen to be talking about one narrow one today. But if we look at any of the current subjects that are heavy on the minds of everyone out there talking politics, it's those topics being used as kind of fodder for political sensibilities, mostly to rile up voting bases to keep people in power who are in power. And I'm not a fan of that.
I just want to point out, and I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, but I will say I do think that we've seen different things in the Biden era than we saw in the Trump era on that very front. There were many things that the Trump era did that were purely about the optics of it, not about reform. But things like actually trying to make sure people get vaccines and protect their health, making sure that there's enough infrastructure to support that mechanism. That's actually something that does good for people, and I am seeing some movement in that front.
I agree entirely. One of the interesting things about the CDA and Section 230 specifically is it was bipartisan and co-authored by a Democrat and a Republican. It was Ron Wyden and Chris Cox, right? And that I think helped get it passed. Without that, I think it would have been seen as a target against one or the other. But that's an interesting thing to me.
Yeah, no, it's a different era, and I don't know how many of your viewers are, second half millennials or Gen Z, but many people in those categories have never truly seen a bipartisan government.
Right.
But there was a day in my life, and I think in your life, when in fact there were true bipartisan efforts that were designed to actually solve problems, not create the optics of solving problems, or not simply score points without solving anything at all. So yeah, Section 230 is sort of a golden age of reform when we could actually have those conversations and say, how can we actually make the world better? And in 1996, when Section 230 was passed, the question that was on the minds of Cox and Wyden was, how can we help this internet? We think this is really important, and we want to make sure that we reach its full potential. And we don't see that kind of farsightedness today.
No, we don't. In fact, it's all very short-sighted about me getting elected in the next cycle. Just the honest truth of it. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat either, so I'm there with you judging on merits, and I'm not seeing a lot of them in this argument other than people like us out there arguing strongly for 230. So now here's the tough question for me. Where do you fall on the idea that it needs any changes at all, let alone that, maybe it shouldn't be touched? Like, where are you on that spectrum?
So as I mentioned, Section 230 enables just a whole host of incredibly viable activity online. We already talked about live streaming as an example, or the ability of people to comment. They're strangers to the community. We may not even know their identity, but they're given that freedom to pipe up. And there's a whole bunch of other things that we get from Section 230 that don't really exist in the offline world. And so from my perspective, if we were to make change to Section 230, I'd say, how can we get more of that? What are the things that we could do to turbocharge Section 230's ability to create these new environments that make our lives better? Sadly, that's not the topic on the table. And usually people say, what are you looking to reform? It's how can you tear down or carve back Section 230? And I'm happy to talk about the merits of any particular solution, but I don't like any of them. But let me just say one more word about that.
Yeah.
You were asking about kind of the politics of Section 230 versus the substance of it. When we have discussion about the substance of Section 230 reform, the question that people like myself ask whoever is advocating the reform, say, what problem do you think you're going to solve? And why do you think that Section 230 reform will actually solve it? And that's the reason why I can't support any of the proposals, because I can't connect the dots between the proposal, the problem that it's purporting to fix, and that Section 230 reform will actually achieve that outcome. Now, there's another question that we also have to ask, is what collateral damage or unexpected consequences are going to come from that. But even let's just start with those first two questions. What problem are we trying to solve, and why is Section 230 going to fix it? And almost every single reform being discussed today clearly fails that. It's not even a close question.
Right, and I mean, again, they're politically motivated. They're not motivated by the freedom of information that a lot of us out here have fought for decades. As someone who's been on the internet since before 230, and it was just kind of almost Wild West like, I thought when 230 came in that it was unbelievably helpful, because by the time the CDA is from 1996. I had already been online since 92, before it had become public, when it was still basically researchers only. Well, that's what it was supposed to be anyways, but all of us were on it anyways. You know how it was. But, those first few years of it, when you were putting up any sort of a system that allowed users to generate content, you were making yourself and yourself alone liable for running that website under the current understanding of the law, based on the few cases that had been tried in that realm that early on. And when the CDA came out with 230, it was first misunderstood by all of us. It took me a month to really get the fact that as long as I basically attempted to moderate, showed some modicum of an attempt to keep things safe on my website, I would be cool. But it didn't come out and it instantly, explain that to me. Like, I had to read news articles, I had to talk to people. It went around the community a lot, though. Like, it was a really big change to how we saw stuff, because it allowed people who were way more scared of what users might post on the internet to finally put a site up that allowed user-generated content and not fear anything. And for me, the freedom of expression that allowed is huge. I come from a lot of different kind of online communities, starting way back with the Wares community, which is sort of unrelated to this one, but all the way up through the Chan communities, from the 4chan and all the rest of them. And the amount of user-generated content that led to global phenomenon. Like, I mean, the Rickroll was user-generated content. Section 230 is basically responsible for allowing the Rickroll to happen. Someone had to have the idea.
Trying to make a sales pitch for it or not at this point? I'm not sure which way you're cutting down that one.
Well, I mean, I've Rickrolled my audience a few times in the last few months just for nostalgia's sake. So I'm
still come back. That's a
they do. Then. They might all possibly come from these same communities, or for the most part, anyways. I just think to have free expression on the internet, and to have the ability to actually post things and feel like, one, I'm in a safe environment, a moderated environment, is huge for creativity. To create these melting pots where new ideas can just be formed. But that's not necessarily the thing that I think is more important to be talked about on a legal standpoint. I have this problem with monopolies, as a lot of people on, my side of the fight do. And we're currently looking at these gigantic global companies like Facebooks and Twitters and whatnot and thinking possibly about how do you break them up, right? There are ideas, there are talks, they're political, they're technical, they're whatever. But I have one big question that I really want an expert to chime in on that could be like the question or could be totally stupid, and I'm hoping it's stupid. But the question is this: when you look at a Facebook as a prime example of Section 230 really enabling a user generated content site, you look at the amount of moderation that website requires. And it is an ungodly amount of moderation that not only requires an entire building in their state full of people just moderating, but it even requires a churn rate because the people get PTSD moderating the type of content that gets posted. And that is not a moneymaker. That, in fact, is nothing but a money pit for a company like a Facebook. You can't profit off of moderation in any real sense of the way. I'm sure they've found ways to somehow use the data, but I mean, in reality, like, it's a money pit, right? It's where you go to lose money. That building full of moderators. So I don't want these gigantic companies to exist at the size they do, just due to the simple, power they wield, like being abused by, say, Cambridge Analytica during an election cycle. But at the same time, how do you get this amount of user-generated content and interactivity without a paid moderation staff, which can only kind of be afforded by someone who's making that level of money? Like, how do you weigh that? How does those are two arguments that I'm very for that are opposed.
You got a lot going on there, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
pick it apart a little bit and see if we can drill down some more. But before I do that, I just want to make one correction. You said that Section 230 applies only if sites do a modicum of moderation. Actually, it applies no matter what. If a site chose to truly do nothing, Section 230 would also apply. I don't recommend that, and that's going to get to the answer to your question. But Section 230 basically, I look at it as like a dial on the moderation scale. You can set it at 100, you could set it at 0, and you can set it anywhere in between. And the legal outcome is the same. If you set it at 0, you set it at 100, you set it at 48, you get the same legal outcome. Websites aren't liable for third-party content. So I just wanted to make that one correction.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that because it doesn't read that way.
Well,
from a non-legal mind, it doesn't read that way.
I could talk to you a little more about that, but this part I'm pretty confident about. It really, what it says at its core is, we're not going to hold you liable for whatever you miss in your moderation process. And if you tried nothing and you miss everything, you still get the same outcome as if you tried really, really hard and you missed just a few things. It says, you know what, we don't want to create that liability for missing because we know that we're going to get better social outcomes if we allow sites to do what they think is appropriate for their audience. Now, the sites that do zero moderation, very few of those last very long. So we don't really see that as in the field very often. And as a result, what you said is true in practice. Now, let me talk to you about your other question. You raised some really important questions here. You raised the point, content moderation is costly to the entities providing it, but it has social value. Not only does it benefit the site privately, but it has social value. We want internet services to look for ways to clean up the trolls, clean up the spammers, to curate the community for their audience. We all benefit as a society when that work is done. So you've got a fit mismatch there where there's social benefits being created, but they're being borne by private costs. So what do sites do about that? So one is sites like Facebook have chosen to invest in tens of thousands of content moderators because of the fact that Facebook's entire economic engine requires it to maintain a brand. And if its brand isn't properly maintained, then it doesn't look that different from 4chan or 8chan, which have their role, but they're not the kind of site
but they're different
users that are likely going to be enjoying Facebook. And so if they want to have this mass market appeal, they're going to have to maintain that brand. But think about some other sites. I want to call attention to Reddit and in particular Wikipedia. These are sites that operate top 10 traffic wise sites some of the highest volume sites, and they get away with very small content moderation teams because they built an infrastructure that allows the users to do some of that work. And in the case of Wikipedia, effectively, users do almost all of the content moderation work. And Wikipedia has built a very baroque but successful model at actually maintaining content moderation without paying people to do the work and relying on people who are not full-time employees. One other thing I'm going to mention about the other way that sites can deal with the cost. I look at content moderation as usually the way we talk about it, it's an ex post solution. After there's been something done, then the site goes and figures out what to do about it. But content moderation or other similar principles can be baked into the site, and a lot can be done to channel users into pro-social activity based on how the site is designed and its architecture and the norms that are set among the power users there that act as role models for everyone else. So a site can invest more money up front in building designs that promote the kind of outcomes that they want, and that reduces the cost at the back end. I think there are ways for sites to achieve the kind of content moderation that we hope they'll do, that we want them to do, that Section 230 enables them to do, and they can do it with potentially not building the same infrastructure as Facebook because there's some other mechanisms that might be available to them.
That all makes a lot of sense, but I definitely have a question then. There seems to be quite a lot of confusion on, and this is great because I'm glad you really tackled this part, on the moderation aspect of it. You will find people saying that it is completely not necessary. You will find articles saying that the law is written in a way where you have to. Is it that the law is written with such broad language that you can get away without doing, or that the intent itself was never to force people to moderate? Like, where is this disconnect from the understanding of this law coming from?
I mean, it really goes to the brilliance of what Cox and Wyden cooked up. It was one of those things. They're both incredibly smart, and they really understood the mechanics of what they were seeing better than anyone else, and truly remarkable for people who weren't really steeped in the community at the time. They got it, and what they said is, we think that sites will choose to do more content moderation work that's socially valuable if we give them the legal freedom to figure out what's right for their community. It was a gamble. It's a risk that they took. They created a legal principle that could have said, I'm going to do zero, and I still get this really great legal benefit. And some sites have taken that position, and those sites, as I said, tend not to last, but they can create a lot of damage in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
But I think that Cox and Wyden got it right on that very fundamental principle that that if we give the freedom, we'll get more of the things that we want than if we tried to hard code it or mandate it. And so they came up with a solution that both was pro speech in the sense of allowing a diversity of sites to emerge because the entry barriers are so low, and yet still socially beneficial moderation is going to take place at most or all of those services. What went right in their thinking to get to that result? We could deconstruct how they were able to come up with something so sophisticated, but they did, and we've seen the benefits, and we all benefit from that. That's why it works.
Yeah, the question for me is always who was advising them at that point. Because
there were many cooks in that kitchen.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
were hearing from a lot of people. There was an entire study that was done in 1995 that was trying to come up with ways to address some of the hot issues of the internet in the day. So they got a lot of input, but they had that really broad insight. They knew if we said that you will be liable for anything that you tried for and missed, they knew that there was an incentive to dial the content moderation dial to zero and do nothing and hope that would be the better legal outcome. And they knew that could not be the right result. That's absolutely what they didn't want the legal system to force people to do.
That is, I mean, the forethought there was quite amazing. The fact that they got there so early was also amazing, because a lot of people related to this also were involved in us ending up with the Net Act and a few other fun things that I'm not a fan of, but that's just due to my history. I think I think the one thing that I want to, make clear to the audience, anyone who might be on the fence because maybe they've heard some of these talking points talking about 230 as some kind of a negative, it allowing for some kind of censorship due to its encouragement of moderation. Um, it is the only reason we have these platforms allowing this content in the first place. There would be shareholders would run for the hills from large companies if they said we're going to allow anyone to post whatever they want on our website if they did not have Section 230. There would be entire companies just shutting down, not able to deal with this, and websites completely turning into things you don't recognize if 230 goes away. So I want to just make it very clear that, from my standpoint here, 230 is unbelievably important. It is one of the underpinnings of the current internet that we have access to. And I would say that, your comments about Wikipedia are interesting to me because while I agree entirely with what you said, and I use Wikipedia quite a lot, those talk pages just feel so toxic every time I read them. Like, the arguments that happen about the edits that the various volunteer editing staff do devolve so quickly into just being mad at each other that I just can't read them. I can't put myself through that.
Yeah, no doubt. Wikipedia is not a community that I personally invested in becoming an editor. I've made many edits on Wikipedia, but I don't consider myself to be a core part of their community. And the reality is that you get any community together, you're going to have fights. That's the human nature. But so if you could put that aside for a moment and recognize there's systemic problems with Wikipedia. What it's produced is nevertheless remarkable and something that manufactures enormous social value for all of us, and it helps me in so many different questions I have so many times a day. So yes, it isn't perfect. I don't think anyone would portray that, but the fact that the moderation system has been able to keep the spammers and the trolls at bay from undermining the core value proposition is really remarkable. Can I just add one thing? You mentioned about this idea that if sites had to carry all content, that would be kind of the end of the internet. And you're absolutely right about that. I just want to make sure there's a couple points I wanted to really hammer
Yeah.
home on that. First is that one of the reasons why I would not want to use a site that required everyone to carry content. I have a real aversion to trollish content. If I see trollish content, I say this is not a forum for me. I understand people want to talk the way, but I don't want to be a part of that community, and I'm
It's your choice.
And so if you require services to carry whatever content's presented, of course the trolls are going to take over, and they're going to drive away people like me. And I think most intelligent conversation, and you're going to end up with essentially what AOL chat rooms looked like back in the old day. There was never any possibility of intelligent conversation there. And so the entire service has become less valuable, not because even if they have, quote, more content, they're getting the wrong kind of content and building the wrong kind of communities. The other thing is obviously that advertisers will not advertise on problematic content. And so if they feel like the site is now filled with content that they don't want their brand associated with, they're also going to nope out of there. And of course, then that takes away a huge chunk of the revenue models that are available to the services. So when a regulator says, we want you to be forced to carry content that you don't want to carry for your audience, what they're really saying is, we want to kill any possibility of you ever making money. And once you do that, that takes away most of the internet.
Yeah, and that is the most important piece of it to me is just what will we be left with after they edit this? And I don't like what comes to mind when I try and imagine that. You were probably, I would guess, there, early enough. Like, when did you first get on the internet?
I first got on the internet in 1991, so we're pretty much contemporaries in terms of that.
Yeah.
And I first cut my teeth on online communities in bulletin board services and Usenet. Those were the two.
Same here. So yeah,
where I got the epiphanies about what the internet could really mean.
So you were probably there for what I deem, and I'm just gonna say this, I truly believe it, the worst month in internet history, and that is September 1993, when AOL connected its gateway to the internet. That week, every service I used was ruined. Every single service I used was ruined, and I very rarely get to talk to anyone who went through that with me. Do you remember the
Yeah.
Eternal September?
Well, and it was, as AOL just started blasting the world with their free CDs, and they
Yeah.
kept on getting more people who didn't know what they were doing onto the internet, and especially when they had seasonal variations. You could just see kind of the tides rolling in of the clueless A-list AOL newbies, and you could just watch them kind of in slow motion destroy communities as they brought their cluelessness. But you know
Yeah.
what? That was a transitional time. It did suck to go through it, but I'm glad
Right.
ultimately we got them online.
I am too. In the end, I was happy about it, but it took a couple years of wading through. Like, all the IRC servers I was on were getting flooded by the first of them to figure out how to get on a different chat system. And then we got, I don't know, someone decided that since all the AOLers were on IRC, we now needed a Windows client for it. And they added colors. MIRC had, why did you put colors on my IRC? It was a black screen with white text. Could have green text if you wanted, but like,
your viewers may not appreciate that any of those kinds of UI changes could matter quite a bit when you're running a 2400 baud modem.
right?
And if they're increasing file sizes, then all of a sudden your modem is slow to a crawl. So yeah, things like going from black and white to color actually could really cheese people off, even though it's prettier, because it made it non-functional for those of us on very outdated modems.
Right? Yeah, it was absolutely crazy at
You
that
probably
time.
had a faster modem, I'm guessing, than I did.
I would have, yeah. I was, yeah. At that point, I was, let's call it borrowing dual ISDN from somebody. I might have been having a little too much fun. Um, so getting kind of back on top. I mean, I love that type of stuff, but yeah, there's just very few people who went through that part of the internet, because there just weren't enough of us online by early '93 to have lived through that and already been in a community that suddenly grew to like 5 times its size, full of people who had no clue what they were doing here. When we were so used to very technically adept people being around us, because they had made it there before, right? But yeah, anyways, I love bringing that one up. But back to Section 230 here. So what do you believe is the current state of things right now? We're watching the Democrats now attempt to do something about 230, whatever that happens to mean. There's been a few talks of bills. There's been some language introduced, but where do we stand on this?
Yeah, I hate to be alarmist, but I did say earlier that I feel like the fate of the internet is at stake right now, that this is the time, that there is such consensus among the policymakers within Washington, D.C., that something has to be done in Section 230. It's like a pressure that's building up. And it's going to pop. There's no way to prevent that at this point. We can't find an easier way to release the pressure some other way. So we're fighting to make sure that the way that Section 230 gets reformed doesn't end the internet as we know it. And that's what we're fighting for. And I don't know how many of your viewers remember the whole SOPA battles, but it reminds
SOPA,
me a little bit
ACTA,
about that.
FESTA, all of them.
But I'm going back to SOPA. If you remember that,
Yeah.
back in 2012,
And we all fought
many
that.
of the internet sites put up a black screen and said, "There's a bill being proposed in Congress that's going to change the internet structurally, and you should call your members of Congress and tell them not to do that." And do you know what happened? Actually, people did call their members of Congress,
Tons of
so
them.
much so that they actually stopped that bill cold. And I feel like we're going to have one of those clarion calls to say, this is the one, this is the bill that's about to change the internet. And if you don't speak up now, you're never going to enjoy the internet the way that you do today. So I am worried about the future of Section 230, and I'm worried about the future of the internet. And I have very little optimism to believe that the politicians that your viewers are electing, who are supposed to be representing them, who are being paid with their tax dollars, are actually doing what the viewers want them to do.
That's rare
Our
these
politicians
days.
are fighting for the internet, but you should assume that your politicians are fighting against the internet, that they're actively speaking out saying, I want to burn down what you love the most.
Agreed entirely on all fronts. I don't like to admit the fact that I think it's going to get changed whether we want it or not. I am hopeful that something comes together to fight the fight. You know, back with the SOPA fight here, and then the ACTA fight in Europe, and the other fights that came out of that. A lot of us were involved heavily in those fights. You know, at that point, helping to organize a lot of Anonymous's actions. We fought hard against that one. And I did way too many
Successfully,
interviews.
by the way. And in fact, I think you were played a critical role in helping stop it.
I think so too. I mean, I don't like to like just go there, but I think we did a lot on that fight. But what I think really came from that fight were people who grew up into roles, and we ended up with systems like Fight for the Future and Save the Net that are now out there that really took that. We're gonna give you a short piece of code that you can put on your website that brings your viewers to the point. And so I really like what Fight for the Future have done in that realm, in that when the big fights show up, they put out, here's the thing you've got to embed on your website very quickly. And so far, I think they've been perfectly on point on all of these fights for the last decade. And I love that of those fights, we have created systems out of them, and people have risen up to points where the big sites, I mean, Reddit will embed Fight for the Future's calls when Fight for the Future really asks for it. And that's a hell of a lot of traffic to go talk to the Congress people about.
And I think all that's terrific. But I will tell you, if it's Fight for the Future on the one hand, and whoever else is enabling them, versus 535 members of Congress who have simply given up on trying to fight for the internet, it's not a fair fight. And that's, I think, the kind of gravitas that we're dealing with. That so many minds in DC have been poisoned about the ills of the internet, and the view that as manufacturers of laws, they need to manufacture a new law to fix the internet. That kind of mentality is so deeply seeped in DC. So we need as many hands on deck on this one. We
Yeah.
really are. We really, the only chance we have is to be united in that respect and to speak up.
So, of the people, who are working on editing this, I mean, I know you talk a lot about this, so you might have like much more detail than I have available to me. Not because I couldn't get it, but because I haven't. Just to be blunt about it. But are there any bills that are currently in any kind of a transitionary phase where they're getting edited, where they're getting updates, where they're asking for help from the outside communities that are looking good, or are we still looking at the junk we've seen publicly reported on so far?
Yeah, as I said, there's no bills that I'm supporting today, and that I actually did blog one bill where I was able to say some things I said were positive about the bill. That was the first time I've been able to say that about a Section 230 related bill. And yet still, then I said, and here's all the negatives. And there was no question that the negatives were outweighed the positives.
Right.
So I have no bills I can say, these are the ones we could all get behind and rally behind and say, let's go ahead and strike this deal with the devil, but take at least this so we know that we're preserving our future. That's just not where the tenor of the discussion is at all. And there's so many bills being introduced, and they're at various stages of development.
Everyone wants their name on it.
I can't keep up with them all. I don't have an inventory of all the Section 230 reform bills today. One of my students who's been doing a phenomenal job is trying to keep up with them. But when I was poking around the database for proposed legislation, I'm like, hey, have you seen these bills? And my student said, I'm not sure I have seen those. There's just so much going on. It's really difficult for us to track. I'll give you an example. Sometimes these bills are not even introduced in a way that we can see them. There's a hearing coming up on Wednesday for a bill that's not Section 230 related, but has significant implications for Section 230. That bill draft has still not been introduced yet. I haven't seen it yet. So I don't even know what they're going to be talking about at this hearing, because I don't even have the substance of the proposed reform. So it's incredibly difficult for a guy like me, with all the privilege I have to access information, to find out what's going on, and it makes it impossible for your viewers to keep up.
I will say that, you're 100% on point there, but I have found that pestering congressional aides over and over and over of the people you think are writing these bills for information about them sometimes will lead to copies of text that you want to read. And whether you were supposed to get it or not. They will just want you to shut up and go away. I wish I didn't have to say it that way, but the first initial ask has never worked. So,
And I'm sorry, I just want to reinforce. I mean, I can't stress enough. The members of Congress do work for us,
yeah,
and they may be tone deaf in what they say, but when a constituent calls them up and says, "I'm unhappy," they listen. Now, again, they might say, "You know what? I've got a bunch of other constituents who would be happy if I did something different. So,
yeah,
sorry, you're in the minority on this one. I'm not going to pay attention." But
right.
if multiple constituents start calling and saying, "I want to pay attention to this. This matters to me," I guarantee you that the staffers in those offices pay extremely close attention. And usually that does get reported all the way up to the member of Congress, that the staffers say, "Hey, we got the spate of calls on this issue. We didn't think it was a hot issue, but people in our district are paying attention." Absolutely, you can make a difference.
So if our viewers here wanted to read what they can find publicly without just simply googling section 230, what's the method for finding the drafts, the bills, the recommendations that are out there? Is there a specific place to go?
It's super hard. Yeah. So all bill drafts ultimately get introduced into a database called congress.gov. And it's actually a pretty nice tool. You can literally go find bills, and you can even do a keyword search for Section 230, not in all of Google, but in congress.gov, and you will find bills that talk about that propose reforming Section 230. But, and I just need to warn you, one of my frustrations, bill drafts don't get introduced into congress.gov until well after the press release has gone out by the legislative proponent of it. So it can take weeks between when a bill is announced to the public and when it actually shows up in congress.gov. This is one of the many ways the system is stacked against the people who want to track it. I use a site called GovTrack. Once I have a bill number, it actually will give me updates via RSS or email or both, that will tell me when a bill that I'm tracking is going to the next stage, whatever that might be. New co-sponsors are joining,
Right.
a committee hearing has been scheduled, whatever. And so you can actually keep up with the proposed legislation to see how it's moving through the system. And I like your method, although I think it's a pretty high intensity one.
It
If
is.
you really are passionate about something and you can find a staffer who has some portfolio of interest in that, if you build a relationship with them and make it feel like you can be an asset to them, or you're someone who won't go away unless they help you, you can actually get them to loop you into the conversation as well. The barriers to entry at that level, they're really high on one thing. You have to be annoying like you were describing,
Right.
but on the other hand, anyone can do it. You don't have to be a law
Yeah.
professor in order to have a voice here. You just have to be a concerned member of a concerned citizen, and it especially helps when you're dealing with the members of your delegation. So your member of Congress from your district or your senators. If you're a constituent, you get a lot of attention anytime you speak up.
I'm pretty lucky with who I have representing me in terms of the internet here. Ed Markey lives 4 blocks that way from where I'm sitting right now. His house is literally right down the street from me over here. And so, like, every now and then when he's in town, I will see him walk to the ice cream shop that's, like, where the corners of our streets meet. And just be sitting out there wearing his Air Jordans and being unbelievably available. And, of course, when it comes to net neutrality and things like that, he's been on the forefront of a lot of those fights. So it's not as hard for me to get that type of information out of my representatives here. But I know how it is in most places.
And I'm sorry, just to point out about that,
Yeah,
getting the time and attention from a member of Congress, it's a little bit harder to do, but it's certainly doable for many people. But getting one of their staffers
yeah,
to pay attention to is actually trivially easy. You can schedule appointments with them. You can say, "I'd like to talk to you about an issue that I'm passionate about," and they will literally schedule a face-to-face appointment. Of
yeah,
course, we're able to do face-to-face things.
right.
Or you can get the privilege to do this kind of email exchange. Now, don't be fooled. the staffers are not the members of Congress, but I will tell you, many of the staffers have the power to make the decision in a way that matters to you. So if you get staffer time and attention, you're actually making progress.
Yeah.
So the door is literally open to anyone who has a passion for something. You can make schedule a meeting. You can tell them what's on your mind, and they will listen. And I
They sit there
guarantee
taking notes. They
and they
deliver
will
them.
report it to their boss,
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, I just had this conversation. I just want you to know this is on the minds of a constituent."
Yeah, and I've done that multiple times here in our area. We've reached out to both our representatives and our senators and sat down with their various aides and local support staff. A couple times I've done it in D.C., but I will tell you the one thing that really I don't know how else to put this, bothered me at one point in my life was I needed to talk to the Judiciary Committee. I was upset at Eric Holder at that point, and I knew they had some power to do something about it, and so I wanted to just have a conversation. And that's a big ask, right? It's just random citizen number 300,000,005, right? But I was in a mood. My friend had just killed himself, Aaron Swartz, and a lot of Eric Holder's policies on how to prosecute and specific notes that he had introduced, memos that he had introduced about how to over-prosecute to win by throwing 50 charges at someone when you really only want one to land because they'll plead, is what led to Aaron actually, in the end, committing suicide. And so I was really angry. And we had about 10 people over at my house when I finally just flipped. And I picked up the phone and my computer, and I started doxing aides. I wasn't even calling their office numbers. I was calling cell phones and home phone numbers of every member of that committee that was currently on the committee at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. They were not happy with me, for one. But for two, they were telling each other that I was bothering them. And finally, I got to this older woman, who I'm not going to dox for various reasons. She's actually wonderful, it turns out. And she said, "Could you stop calling everybody? What do you want?" And I asked who she really was. And she said, "Well, I've been here for 30 years. This is the fourth person I've been an aide to. I know how the system works and everybody knows me. Just tell me and I'll tell you whether you're going to get anywhere with this." And I explained the situation to her. And she said she would call me back the next day. And the next day I got that phone call. And that phone call was being asked to actually talk to the committee based on my firsthand knowledge of what had happened. Unbeknownst to me, they were already trying to find a way to get Eric Holder out of office. So I was providing ammo to a group of people who really wanted it. And what was strange is both sides wanted that ammo, not just the Dems or the Republicans. They were both angry with them. So it was great. But afterward, over the next few days, as all the people who were there in that room when I just went nuts on the phone were talking about it, they would talk to me. Some of them talked in front of me about it. About, I can't believe he did that, and he's talking to them now, and he's gonna go down to and I don't know what blew my mind the most, the fact that it had worked or the fact that everyone watched, that I literally just used Google and a few other websites that they all saw me use and got these phone numbers and then made these phone calls. And within an hour, I'm sitting there with someone calling me back the next morning, inviting me to talk to Congress. And they saw it happen. They saw how, in reality, simple it was. And they're still sitting there questioning, "Oh my God, I can't believe he pulled that off. How do you do that even?" They watched me do it. It was dead simple. It just blew my mind how disconnected people think they are from their representation. It is...
Well, you're lucky there's not a GreggHoush anti-privacy law that got introduced in response to that.
But you know what I'm saying? That was an extreme example, but it's something I did. And so it really surprises me how disconnected people are from their representation. It really does. So many people I talk to that I say, just literally call your congressperson. They're like, "What will that do?" I'm like, "You will get to talk to someone." They will even set up an in-person meeting and take notes and tell them what you've said. You get enough friends to do it, it'll change their opinion. Now, maybe for a million other reasons, there's lobbyists, there's donors, there's other things in your way that you would have to seriously overcome with this certain representative, depending on who they are. You can still talk to them. They will listen. Whether they pay attention is a whole different thing, but they will at least listen.
They work for us. Never forget that. And that's why voting rights are so important, because they know that when what happens in that ballot, whether it's in person or by mail, whatever it is, they know that it's a binary thing. Either they get the vote or they don't, and they will do a lot to try to get your vote.
They will. They will do a surprising amount. And if you can show any level of local organizing, where you've kind of been noticed as someone who's thrown local events or done something where you've been named alongside, say, the mayor, like anything you can do to show that locally I've got people, that will scare them into paying a lot more attention. So be active locally, not only for that reason, for the obvious reason that everyone should be active locally, but you can do a lot as just someone who is represented by these people. Whether they listen and actually act upon it in the end is really dependent on the representative. I know a lot of them just don't. I would think that happens a little more in the red states than the blue, but I'm not a big fan of the Democrats either, so I'm not going to give them too much on that front. So again, what it sounds like to me is there needs to be some sort of a call to build that spreadsheet that says these are the people with bills in the works. And that might require calls to every one of their offices to ask whether they're working on a bill or going to co-sign a bill or already have one introduced that we haven't seen yet, and getting that list together before we know what we're fighting.
The problem is that list's going to be so long, I'm not sure what you're going to do about it.
Yeah.
And so what we do in my community, someone who's actively trying to protect Section 230, from using the tools that I have, is to try and figure out where's the ones that actually matter and figure out where the lever points might be with
the
that.
ones that have a chance.
The ones that have a chance, because there's a lot of bills that are introduced are really messaging bills. They're not intended to do anything except get the name of the authors out into the public, and especially to their constituents, to say, hey, I'm fighting for you. Look, I introduced this bill. But they're never going to invest in resources in it, or they don't have the right committee memberships to actually make sure that it moves forward. And so those bills are distractors. You could spend a lot of energy on something that has no chance ever of passing. So a lot of what I do in my community is say, okay, these are the ones that we think matter. Now, what are the coalitions that might form about this? What can we do to talk to the people who are going to be forming those coalitions and try to get them to understand the concerns that we have? And I'm happy to have that conversation with anyone, honestly, any of your viewers who are motivated to really figure out, okay, these are the bills that matter and these are what we're going to do about it. We need all the help we can get.
Yeah, at Eric Goldman on Twitter, reach out. I went straight there, took me to the website, got me the email address, and just reached out. Very accessible. I
don't think you would have had a problem finding me based on what it sounds like your ability to talk to people. So
sure, if
you make it easy, you didn't have to go to very.
If you didn't make it public, I probably would have still reached out. But that's just the skill sets, right? We all have our things. I don't think I'm ever going to be dean of a college. I don't think I've got that in me.
Most people will consider that to be that you've chose the right path.
Right. Let's see what the audience wants to talk about here. Please ask. So we're gonna want a link, obviously, that I can share out on my Twitter, and I can share out with the YouTube upload when this goes up later and all that. And we have a Discord, so I'll put it in there. So if you've got a link that will really help link anyone else up who might want to help with those efforts, that would be great. So definitely share that with us at some point. What do you guys have in the chat there? Do you have any questions that we didn't get to? This has been an interesting chat over there. I notice former roommates. I notice former coworkers. All kinds of people showing up in the chat. I'm being told by chat that they would like to be your personal army.
So my students have a joke that they call me the wizard because reasons. And so, I'm like, look, if I'm a wizard, I want to be Dumbledore, because Dumbledore had an army. I want it to be Goldman's army, but I want an army just like Dumbledore had.
I love it. Have I thought about dyeing my hair so I don't look so old? Dude, we haven't hung out that much, Mackie, in a while. Like, this happened, a while ago. I went gray way too early. But I will say this about my hair. If you want me to talk about something just related to that, every man in my family lost their hair by like 20. So like, I guess it's cool that I still have my hair. I don't know that it matters too much. I don't see why this is a topic, but I do still love you, Mackie. Um, let's see here.
You look great to me. So
Thank you. I appreciate it. But Mackie, let's see here. Who else? So Dr. Abinway says if you could make one reform to higher education / academia at the prof level, what would it be?
Ooh, wow, that's a tough one.
Right?
I mean, I'll tell you the number one problem that I see, and it's like so far above every other one. The cost of going to school has gotten so high that it's a barrier to entry and it becomes a drain on people's long-term economic prospects. So the one change I would make is to cut costs so that we could make education more affordable. But that kind of skips over like, how would we do that? How will we reduce the cost? But boy, my students feel a lot of economic distress from the cost of attending school. I want to make it a good deal. I feel a great deal of pressure to make it a good deal, but I know that it's a problem for them, and that's something we have to fix.
That is what I think is the absolute right answer to the current problem. Everything else can come after that. Let's solve that one first. Let's expand on that for 1 second, though. So there are proposals, there are ideas. There's people like Bernie, AOC, and all kinds of others out there trying to push for just outright, forgiveness of the debt. And then, of course, Bernie's got his plans for how to provide, the state colleges for free across the country and all of that. Do you have strong opinions there? Because I definitely support Bernie's moves in that front. Like, I'm a big fan of what they want to do.
I don't know the details of the particular policies, which one would actually work. I think that clearing the debt for the millennials would do a lot of good, but if we don't fix it going forward, then we've only done a one-time fix. We have to deal with the structural problem on an ongoing basis. And I'll just talk about my personal experience. I went to UCLA for undergrad and for grad school. When I went to UCLA as an undergrad, it cost me about $1,500 a year. And I got a really first-rate education for money that most of us nowadays, even if you did all the multipliers for inflation, because
Right.
it has been a few years, would still look like a really great deal. And that's because the education was subsidized by the state. And over the years, the subsidies have gone away. So the costs have gone up greater than the rate of inflation. And so to me, we have to find a way to create some kind of low cost or free option for people that allows them to achieve their professional goals. Now, community colleges play that role. We've seen, I think, a number of people recognize how valuable that is to take advantage of it. But because it's only 2 years, it's not a full solution for people. If they want the full year 4-year degree, they're going to have to incur these costs somewhere else. And so to me, I think figuring out how can we provide those subsidies to education and investment in our future, in our society's future, I think we got to figure out better mechanisms than we currently have, because costs have gone up so dramatically to make it what was basically almost the equivalent of going to free today. Today, that's not the case at all.
A few less bombs being made might afford the entire country, an education.
Look,
that's where my mind
as I
is.
said, not a Democrat or Republican, but there are some good empirical studies about if you invest your money into social services, do you get good payback on them? And education routinely shows up very highly on those lists of multipliers. The dollar invested by society in education is going to give a multi-dollar return in the future. So to me, I think, finding ways to put the money into that, maybe as opposed to some of the lower value investments that we make, would be a really wise policy decision.
Agreed entirely. In fact, that's also one of the arguments for the defund the police movement, in that the higher rates of education and access to it and promotion of it will lead to less crime, needing less policing. So the movement of that money from one to the other leads to less people going to prison for reasons that wouldn't exist if they had gotten a proper education instead of a school to prison pipeline being built for them. So I completely agree on that point. Yes. The chat asks, in relation to 230, would it be helpful to have a bill crafted like other industries have, and have people lobby for it? So instead of allowing the senators to do their work, or their own, various donating companies and whatnot to work with them, having a more, industry specific bill made and then brought in. And is that already
I love
happening?
I love that idea. It's not really happening, but here's the problem. There's really few members of Congress left who would be willing to stand in favor of Section 230. So, for example, you had briefly referenced the FOSTA SESTA bills. These were bills that passed. 25 members of Congress in the House voted against it, and only 2 senators voted against it. These were tough bills for people to stand against. And so we've seen kind of the waning of members of Congress who'd be willing to be proactively defending the law. And so I'm not quite sure what that bill would look like and who would then own it and be willing to invest it. And if there would be a big enough coalition for that to be anything more than just a messaging bill, like I mentioned.
Right.
But if someone had some ideas about ways to work with it, I'd love to talk with them about that. What I don't like doing is playing defense all the time. And that's
Right.
pretty much what we've done. I would love to play offense here and say, you know what, if we're going to do something, this is the way to address problems that would help without burning down the things that we love. And I don't have a really good way of doing that right now. And I will tell you the reason why I haven't been able to do it, and some of the people who are like-minded, I've talked to them about this, and I think they're similarly struggling. I think part of it is because the other sides don't have a clear statement of the problem they want to address. So I can't easily go to them and say, okay, well, if that's your problem, then here's the solution. They're like, I just want to burn it down. And I'm like, well, I don't want to burn down. And that becomes a zero-sum game. So we've really
Right.
struggled with this playing offense point that your questioner is raising. But I would love to do it if I could figure out how.
I'm a big fan of that, and some thought could definitely be put into it. I wonder what Timothy Wu's joined the Biden White House, and well, I definitely have some differences with Wu. I think Wu is generally near us on our thoughts on 230 and things we've discussed tonight. That might be a good person to get contact with about pushing stuff down the line.
I think we're going to really struggle with getting the Biden administration to do anything proactively helpful to Section 230.
So do
My
I.
hope is that, sorry?
So do I, 100%.
Yeah. My hope is that that we can have the Biden administration help slow down or prune some of the harmful reforms, but I'm not sure that's going to be the case. Professor Wu, someone I've known for a long time, has done some really important work. I'm not sure that he's 100% behind Section 230 anymore.
I would
I
like to
think
have
that
that conversation with him. I think I'm going to.
yeah. Well, you should invite him on and talk to him about where he might see the limits. The reality is that there are very few academics left who actually are full-throated defenders of Section 230.
That is sad to hear. That is honestly just sad to hear. This is our free speech. This is protection of kind of the current, public commons. This is, where we live at this point, and that is definitely sad to hear. Let's say, okay, so Mackie asks, let's say Congress repeals Section 230 tomorrow. How does that change content moderation practices?
Yeah, so here's what happens if Section 230 goes away. There's actually three dominant outcomes that could occur. Dominant outcome number one is that internet services do everything in their power to moderate content in a way that eliminates their risk. They're never going to do it perfectly, which means that they're going to face risk for the things that they miss. Exactly why Section 230 was first put in place. So the liability costs plus the content moderation costs could be really quite high, enough to drive many services out of business. And along the way, as they're doing that liability management, content moderation, a lot of socially beneficial content gets taken away. If in doubt, remove, or if in doubt, don't give the publication tools in the first place. So we see both a shrinkage of the amount of content available, we see a sanitization of the content that's available, and we see the costs for all of that go up dramatically. Now, another node could be what we had talked about, this idea, don't moderate at all, do zero. And if you do zero, maybe there will be some legal defenses available to you. Basically, with the theory, you didn't know there was a problem because you weren't actually trying to intervene with the database in the first instant. There were sites like that back in the pre-Section 230 days.
There were.
But as I mentioned, those sites tend not to last very long today. So
they
I don't
devolve
see a win.
Quickly.
Yeah, I don't see a win if anyone tried that model of liability management. So liability management technique is number one is to do a lot more, spend a lot more money, get rid of a lot more content, and hope that it all works. Two is do little as possible, probably can't survive. And three is just say, you know what, I'm taking my marbles and I'm leaving. And I'll give you an example of how that would look. Like, imagine what would Twitter look like without Section 230. I think there'd still be a Twitter. But I think what would happen is that Twitter would take away the publication tools from everyone other than corporate brands and a few celebrities. With the idea that the celebrities, many of them are going to try and avoid being risky.
And they've got PR teams protecting their image.
Right. So they're going to make good choices. The brands are going to make generally good choices. There'll be contracts or indemnities between the brands and the celebrities. And then everyone else goes, I'm out. So no offense, I think you're probably out too. So then, what you've got is you've got Arby's and Wendy's having a Twitter fracas about puns on hamburgers. And there's still value to that. It still might be entertaining, but it's not Twitter.
You've got the same person arguing with himself because there is a guy who controls like 10 of those. All the funny ones you see lately is the same person who got internet famous a while ago.
And then I think what will happen to other services, say like Twitch is a really good example. Twitch will become a series of walled gardens. Basically, it will only be people who pay to get access to content from a small number of producers.
So like the esports teams and whatnot.
Exactly. And so people will pay to access that content. That money will allow the service to recruit the right talent, pay them for the work that they're doing, and it basically can professionally produce content. And so the way I describe that is that that's going to look like the Quibification of the internet. What'll happen is we'll have a lot of Quibbies on the internet or a lot of Netflix on the internet. And we'll think that's great because that content is great. It's just not the internet anymore. We're not talking to each other anymore. We're being broadcasted to.
Right.
So what happens to content moderation on the internet? I think the most likely thing is most user-generated content services exit the industry. They pivot if they can afford to professionally produce content and get rid of all the amateur user-generated content. And a few services, if they can find a way to profit from it, will have very restrictive content moderation policies.
So that leads into the second question by same person there is, so does this help bigger social media companies who can absorb that extra cost to eliminate competition?
I mean, thank you. Yes, you get it instantly. This is something that members of Congress either don't get or don't care. But yes, the repeal of Section 230 entrenches the dominant players because they're the only ones who might have enough profit to be able to choose that first node I mentioned, where they would do very tight moderation and accept the legal risk for anything that they miss. You have to be really profitable to make that work. And that looks like Google and Facebook, and everyone else says, I can't keep up with them. And Section 230 has had a pro-competition benefit that has been completely overlooked by the members of Congress. They don't realize how much innovation and new entrants into the market we see because Section 230 has kept open the door. And I'm convinced that Google and Facebook are not the winners of the internet. That if we look back 20 years or 50 years, we'll say Google and Facebook were really important and maybe they still exist today, but there's another set of services that have become even more important since. And Section 230 is the reason those displacers of Google and Facebook might emerge. Without Section 230, the door closes, Google and Facebook win.
So that would be a good reason for companies like that to possibly lobby against us. To say it lightly.
I'm sorry to say it, but if you aren't aware of it, Facebook is actively advertising in the DC area saying we support internet reform of internet law, including Section 230. So Facebook is saying, let's put Section 230 in play. And the members of Congress are like, that's great. Even the industry agrees with us. All the
Of
rest are like,
course.
no, it's not the industry agrees with you.
It's
It's
just
the
that guy.
incumbent monopolist who says, this is a good deal for me, and I'm willing to burn down the rest of the internet as I close the barn door behind me.
Wow, that's well, I mean that explains a lot of what's going on. I mean that is one of those keys, to looking to where the money is, and that is an interesting one. Now, when it comes to defending against this type of stuff, a lot of times the public relies on academics, to really step up, because not only do they have the knowledge and the ability to really focus, on subjects like this, but it usually puts them in a position where they might have access to, government in a way that the general public doesn't think they do, although I think they do. So in that regard, someone asks, or a couple people actually asked in the chat, based on your comment earlier, why are academics shedding their defense of 230? Why are less and less academics publicly on this side of the argument?
Another good question, and I don't have a single answer for it. I will say that I think that if you understand the worldviews of most academics, they are also in the business of manufacturing new law. They want, they generally favor, if I see a problem, let's create a new law to fix it. And so many legal academics are trained that way. So to the extent that now we say, I see problems on the internet and Section 230 is enabling them, let me manufacture a new law that would fix that. And so we're seeing academics across the country who are coming up with their flavor of Section 230 reform, like law professors do generally. I
Right.
will also tell you that there is a smaller component of academics who I think are very interested in we're trying to get positions in the Trump administration, or we're looking to play to the Republican crowd. And so they now are in favor of basically attacking the sources of power that have evolved in the internet space. The way that Republicans have messaged that as, we're going to fight the power on behalf of our constituents. So there's a smaller community of academics who've done that, but most of them start with this premise. What I do is I make laws to fix problems. And so,
So
Section
let's edit
230 is
this.
blocking me.
I'm not a fan of that being where we're heading. I understand proper regulation, but at the same time, that doesn't seem to be the solution. I mean, honestly, to me, the solution is just leaving it alone. It has worked. There will be arguments.
What I describe about Section 230 is that it might be what I consider to be the least worst outcome. And what I mean by that is that under Section 230, we know that people are going to do terrible things to each other online. That's a given. And it's not really because of Section 230, it's because that's just human nature. We do terrible things to each other. But if you think about it, and I don't know how many of your viewers are Pareto understand economics and Pareto optimality, we might be at a point where the only way that we can make a change is to get away from an optimal position, and we're going to make at least one community worse off, and maybe no one better off. And so I look at this as kind of like I think it's a parabola, if I remember my geometry. We're at the peak of the parabola. You move any direction and the slope's going to be going negative down. That we'll still have people being terrible to each other, and we'll have less conversations taking place, or we will have more government control over what we say in ways that benefit the government and not the rest of us. I think we might be at what I'll call the least worst outcome, the maxima of the situation. Even if that maxima might feel like it's negative, the question that I want anyone to answer is, by making a change, how do we make people better off without making them worse off? And I don't think you can do that with Section 2. I think any reform will take us away from that.
One of those rare moments where they might have gotten it right the first time, or at least as right as they could.
As I said, the least worst outcome.
Yeah.
And we know that one of the payoffs in Section 230 is the the total explosion of the internet as a tool for society. And that's something they got right. They were worried that regulation was going to keep us from seeing the potential of the internet. And they got right the ability to hold back the lawyers, to hold back the censors long enough to see the potential of the internet. I don't know if we've seen it all, but what we've seen tells us this is a really important tool for humanity. And we wouldn't have seen that under a different regime without Section 230.
Again, completely agreed. I'm there with you. So another question here is a new one. How would rescinding Section 230 damage civil litigation recourse?
So I'm not sure I understand the question, but I do want to say a few words about that. So there's Section 230 is a statute that Congress created, and it sits on top of the constitutional protections that are provided to us. So those Congress can't touch. Congress can't take away our constitutional rights, like the right to free speech and right to free press. They can't take those away, but they can supplement the Constitution, say, you know what, we want more free speech, or we want more free press than we would get if we relied only on the Constitution. And so Section 230 is like an enhancer of the First Amendment. It takes the free speech and free speech press principles, and it makes it so that we get more of those. And the way it does it is by helping defendants who are sued for user-generated content be able to defend against those lawsuits cheaper and quicker. And so it's like a procedural fast lane that takes the First Amendment principles and makes it easier for the court to reach the outcome that might have been obtained no matter what, but at lower cost to defendants, and with more certainty. And that lower cost and greater certainty is what enables services to feel confident that they're actually going to get the legal benefits of Section 230. So Section 230 has a huge impact on litigation. But that's an easy thing to disturb. And so many of the reforms would take away the low cost or greater certainty of Section 230. And as a result, they would take away the thing that actually made it an enhancer to the First Amendment.
And that is the most important piece of all. Currently, 230 adds to our ability to have free speech on the internet, free speech in general at this point, because like I've said, I believe that the internet has really replaced the public common. It is where we all are at this point. And any changes to it are going to be negative at this point. As you described, I mean, I love the parabola idea there. We are definitely at the best of all outcomes with where I think 230 is. And I'm really hoping we don't end up with any changes that break it. But I also, like you said earlier, think that changes are inevitable, so we need to make the least worst changes happen. So there's
I'll
lot.
I'll be fighting for that, but as I said, I need Goldman's army to help out.
Give me links, and I will spread them to all the right people. There are a lot of people who will care about this, because this might be U.S. law, but that's sort of irrelevant in the way the internet works, with so many of the large companies being here. If this goes through, it's going to affect the entirety of the internet. So people in other countries, be it Canada and European countries, anywhere really, this will affect you. So join and fight. The locals who can be constituents, who can talk to their congresspeople, are definitely top of the list of possibly getting something going here. But every single person helping matters. To quote old video games, needs more pylons. So yes, we let's go. We'll get some links. I'll put them into the various chats out there. I'll spread them around online. I'll get a few other big accounts to spread them and see what happens. If you get me something tonight, tomorrow, the next day, whenever you feel like you've got the destination you want them to end up at, by all means.
Absolutely, I'd be thrilled to do it, and thanks for helping evangelize it.
Yes,
we've obviously agreed on the core principles, and that shows, that's good news for this call, but that's not representative of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so, the more that we can help spread that word, I think the better we're going to end up.
This is great. All right, so we're well over an hour at this point. I asked you for an hour. I think we're nearing the end here. Chat's asked some wonderful questions. Thanks for everyone in chat. This is great. Chat always asks one specific internet question, and I have to repeat it because just, I'm me. And chat is currently asking you to shoe on head.
That's a reference that goes over my head. So,
Well, it literally is. They like it when people prove that they're with us by taking a shoe off and setting it on top of their head live on video.
Shoe on head.
Yes, this was a reference to events that used to happen on the Chans when you would want to really know that the person you're talking to was the person they said they were. And one of the tricks to that was, well, if this person sends me right now a picture with a shoe on their head, they couldn't possibly have a picture of that human with a shoe on their head, so it has to be them. It was one of those.
Since I wasn't prepared for this, I'm going to acknowledge I'm actually...
Only one person has ever actually done it, so do not feel bad about not doing it. But they're going to ask every time.
They're flying free here. Shoot this. And
nice,
I'm
nice.
not going to comment on whether I'm wearing pants.
Nice. Okay, that's as good of an answer right there. I love it. So this was awesome. I'm really happy we met. I'm sure we're going to talk again now. I mean, I knew of you from long ago. Chat might not know, but Eric here has given DEF CON talks. He's been around for a long time in these communities talking about these types of subjects, and even so much as to all of the cases related to like how I got in trouble long ago in the past. Professor Goldman here even did a big write-up in paper on what happened, the prosecution, the laws related to it, all of that fun stuff. There's a paper that went quite wide in our kind of the software piracy community that Eric had done. So I was really happy you got to join us tonight. This was really cool.
I appreciate the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for the great conversation.
All right, everyone, that's going to be the show tonight. And again, the professor will share with us a link. I will get it out to all of you, and we can all start helping out on this topic. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for coming.